Hi everyone. My name is Steven, and I've been thinking about doing this for a while. Thought I'd give it a go before I chicken out again. Um, I wanted to create a media channel out there specifically to talk about shame um, and how toxic shame can be. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because, as someone who has a master's degree in psychology and is a counselor, I encounter shame all the time. Also, as someone who has been diagnosed with multiple fun issues, um, I know what shame feels like and sounds like in my head, and I can kind of recognize it in other people. So I wanted to have a safe space for people to come in and talk about shame, talk about what shame is, what it looks like, how to deal with it, ask questions, all those sorts of things. So here we go. Um, just like if I was talking in front of a classroom, which I used to do a little bit, I wanted to lay down some ground rules. Basically, I want this to be a safe space for people to be able to come, to ask questions, to not know answers. I also always have it a rule that anyone in the comments or including myself can choose not to answer a question just based off of it being maybe too personal, too close to home, uncomfortable, anything like that. If if people do adopt, other user profiles or go by a different name, I also want people to be able to feel safe in those identities. So I ask that people take the story, leave the person. So me, you can take the person and the story. Everything that I'll be talking about is public knowledge, psychology, information, things that I've learned, all that kind of stuff. So you can attach my name to the stories. However, some people may comment or say something, and they may not want to be identified. So I just ask that people are respectful. And then basically the last rule that I kind of ask for in these types of situations is, the Vegas rule. I know it's the internet, and that's not exactly possible, but I want people to be able to feel safe here. Again, safe to ask questions, things like that. So to get started, the reason that I got tuned into shame was because of a therapist that I had quite a few years ago. She was awesome. Her name is Allison. If she ever comes across this, I'd love to tell you about some of my adventures. She connected me with shame. And I was born and raised Mormon. And not to rag on any one specific religion, I think a lot of religions have shame built into them. So I want to differentiate the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is just feeling bad that you did something. Like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Maybe next time I'll handle it better. Guilt is kind of taking responsibility and going with it. Shame, however, is that voice inside your head, and it usually comes in 3 flavors. The flavors generally are, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, and I am broken. Some people have all 3 flavors. Some people only have one flavor of shame. So again, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, and I'm broken are the 3 flavors of shame. So that's that really icky voice when you're feeling the worst you've ever felt that says, this always happens. You knew this would happen. You're not good at anything. It's that voice that hurts the most and is the hardest to talk about. And one of the reasons that it is important to talk about shame is because you don't have to live with shame. And to get rid of shame, you have to do something very difficult. The opposite of shame and the cure to shame is vulnerability. Genuine vulnerability. And I know that I may have just lost like half the people watching. I promise. And let me tell you why. Shame breeds and grows in your brain. Left unchecked, as I'm sure many of you have felt as I have, shame turns into this deep black hole of despair that people just spiral down into. And no matter how much you try to talk to yourself, distract yourself, like, it sucks. And then sometimes, honestly, you don't get over it for a night, a day, a week, a month. That is what shame is. And vulnerability is shining a spotlight on shame. Because the risk in being vulnerable is being yourself. The risk in being genuine is that you could lose some people. These are terrifying realities that are hard to face. So a lot of us don't talk about shame. We don't talk about that, that mean voice. And I always encourage people to give it a description. If you can, imagine the shame monster, because it is a monster. Imagine it however you want, but try and think of its shape or color, texture, flavor, how it smells, how it makes you feel. And chances are, as you focus in just on that feeling of shame, hi Gina, I am doing well, thanks. As you focus in on that feeling of shame, we don't like that. It doesn't feel good. And so we distract ourselves. Movies, TV, alcohol, shopping, video games. It could be anything, honestly. I'm just naming a few of the big ones. But that shame, the shame monster, it is possible to get rid of the shame monster. So I wanted to start this, to say hello to people and to say, hey, guess what? Shame is a real thing. Shame hurts and is toxic and can really bury someone for a very long time. So I wanted to, bring the elephant into the room. It's something we don't want to talk about, but it's something that we need to talk about. So shame. Yeah. I want to talk about shame and vulnerability. And those are really big things. So does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts, additions? I am doing this live in an attempt to get immediate feedback. I do realize as my first episode that feedback may be slow. And there's a button in the way. Sorry. Go away. There we go. Anyway, the topic we're talking about is shame. How do we recognize it? How do we get rid of it? That could be a great place to start. How do we recognize shame? One of the ways we recognize shame is how we talked earlier, the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt, again, just feeling bad about something. Maybe I should have handled that better, or, I just don't feel good about how I treated that person. That's guilt. I can apologize. I want to apologize. That's guilt. Shame is that monster. I imagine it as this kind of oozy, black, dark, slimy creature. That's how I picture shame. I imagine it kind of like crawling up my back and getting this mouth, I guess, talking to me and saying, "Why are you so stupid? Of course that wasn't going to work out. Everything you do doesn't work." Shame when I got rejected from grad schools and my jobs. I've been unemployed for quite some time. Shame is the voice that says, "I knew you couldn't do it. I knew you never would. And this is what you get for trying." Shame is toxic. And it always gets right at your insecurities, the things that you are most scared of other people knowing, of other people learning, or just of you confronting. Sorry, my light keeps changing. So the topic is shame. Any questions, thoughts, things that have come up while we've been talking about shame? Feel free to chime in. I always encourage people who haven't talked a lot to talk a little more, especially in person. I know this is different being online. Any questions about shame or anything that I've talked about and how it relates to just feeling good about ourselves, mental health, those sorts of things? I know there's at least 4 of you. I have a counter. Well, anyway, I can keep talking. I can just talk forever. So recognizing shame sometimes takes time, even just to notice when it comes up. I think the first step in anyone in terms of changing behaviors is just noticing that they exist. So it's not bad. It's not bad to think, oh my goodness, it's been, 5 months. How long have I been doing that? That's okay. It took you 5 months to recognize it, and you recognized it. Another thing that shame can look like is, you're not good enough. So there again is that voice. You should have noticed this sooner. You should have gotten help sooner. Those things. I call them shooting on yourself and masturbation. And that's because anything in your head that says should or must do something is not authentically you. Nope. It's from someone in your past or something you picked up that is telling you how you should do something, which again is shame. You should do this. That is shame. Just listen to yourselves over this next week, how you talk to yourself in your head. You'll hear should a lot. So I had a question pop up, and I want to answer it before I continue too far. So is it possible to turn that voice of shame into a positive, or is recognizing it and dealing with it the way, to best manage? So yes, it is absolutely possible to turn that voice of shame into a positive. And it takes a really long time. I don't know why, maybe biology or just how we evolved or how human brains evolved. I don't know. But we're really good at shaming ourselves. And I might be speaking for myself here. I shame myself around the clock. That's one of the reasons I first started going to therapy and started, seeking a psychiatrist, was because, not audible voices, but that voice that I think shames a lot. And it's very frustrating. So if it took me 20 years just to recognize the shame voice, longer than 20 years, then it's going to take an understandably long time to undo what's been done. And that makes sense, right? If we just think about it, that makes sense. But in neuroscience, something that we have to remember is, and the phrase is, what fires together wires together. Meaning, the longer something fires in your brain that triggers you to do a certain response, the more often your brain will go down that path. So if one of the reasons, you've been successful was from shaming yourself for the last 20 years, that's going to be your brain's first go-to. Oh, I like this path. I'm going to go down that path because it's easy. It's like a drop of water being eroded every time. So part of working on the voice of shame and turning it into a positive is just recognizing its potence, recognizing its existence. You can turn it into positive, and I think it takes a lot of hard work from personal self, family members, friends, all that kind of stuff. I think recognizing it is just the first step. So the second part of your question, recognizing any negative behavior is the first step. And something else that I always want to remind people is there's a reason you're doing what you're doing. For every negative behavior that someone has that they want to get rid of, there was a reason that they started doing that behavior. It benefited them somehow. This is my cat Zeus. He likes to interrupt me when I do live videos. Sorry about that. What was I talking about? I just completely lost my train of thought. You made me lose my train of thought. Okay, yeah, there's a reason we do things. So think about it. Maybe as a kid, one of your ways to get your needs met, fed, or even just attention, was to listen not do anything if you heard fighting or arguing, commotion. You just said, you know what, I'm not even going to participate at all. I'm going to keep the peace. And because you kept the peace, your family members may have responded to you positively. So you as a child learned, and you probably don't know it in all of these fancy words, but you kind of know in the back of your brain, if I appease people, put my needs aside, pretend they don't exist, and just listen to what other people need, people will like me. Okay, there is nothing wrong with that. We all picked up patterns and behaviors watching our parents, living in anywhere. We all picked up something. So recognizing that these thought patterns don't work anymore is okay. And the shame voice will tell you it's not okay. The shame voice will tell you, well, you should have figured this out 10 years ago. Why are you still struggling with this thing? I thought we talked about this already. I thought, I thought we had this all figured out. You're so stupid. You're never gonna be happy. That's a shame voice. And that's why, as a counselor, I do try to tell people that the shame voice is strong. Sometimes you have energy for it, sometimes you don't. There's nothing wrong with that. Some days are easier than others in fighting the shame monster. And everyone has a shame monster. So that's also something just to kind of recognize. And that's not to say everyone has a shame monster, so don't you bring yours up. That's the shame monster talking again. That's just acknowledging that we all have these concerns, these vulnerabilities, these thoughts that we get stuck in, and that's okay. And part of working on shame that I've learned is mindfulness. And mindfulness, I used to think I got what mindfulness was, but for me it's different from what I originally thought. For me, I thought mindfulness was this hippie idea in nirvana that I could not find. I did not know how to turn my brain off. Still don't. Probably never will. But one of my therapists told me one day, hey, think of mindfulness as curiosity. And I was like, oh, okay. I know how to be curious. I'm kind of a nerd. I wear my I nerd for you shirt. I guess I call myself a dork. I don't know. Something like that. Anyway, curiosity made sense. I've connected with curiosity before. So he said, be curious about what's going on in your brain. That's what mindfulness is. So for me, curiosity is just watching. It's kind of turning on my therapist, scientist brain and says, I'm completely detached. I'm just going to watch and see what happens. And that's when I started noticing the shame voice sneaking into my brain at all random parts of my day. Even just getting ready in the morning, I started recognizing I'm always in a really bad mood in the morning when I'm in the shower. It seems like my shame voice is most active. And that was one of the things that got me started on some psych medication. And now I know if I'm in the shower and I'm noticing my shame voices are getting really loud, bringing up garbage from my past, I just kind of smile to myself because I'm trying to be curious about my emotions rather than judging them. And I smile to myself and I say, hi, shame, good to see you again. Little black slimy monster, popping up again on my shoulder like he does. Hello again, welcome. It's a beautiful day, and my psych meds haven't kicked in yet, so you'll be gone in a few minutes. And sometimes that works. Other times I have to dig a little deeper and be like, okay, shame, I hear you, I'm listening, I know everything that you're going to tell me, and I'm really tired today, but I'm just going to hang in there. And then other days, the shame voice is almost just like a hum, white noise that I don't even notice. So working with shame, you have to have two things towards yourself, kindness and mindfulness. Mindfulness, again, just being that curiosity feeling. I'm curious, my heart's beating fast, my palms are sweaty. Where does shame seem to happen the most? When? Why? All that kind of stuff. And then kindness. To just like what I brought up earlier, remembering the brain learn to do what it's doing. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to. You've been doing that pattern for 10, 20, 30 years sometimes. You're not going to change it overnight, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's that kindness, which I think kind of comes with curiosity, because it's that non-judgmental thing. I kind of picture it like looking at a child. I would never want to tell a child, you should have known better, how dare you, when they make a mistake. I would want to say, here's what can sometimes happen when you make a mistake, and you're great and still wonderful, and your worth hasn't changed just because you made a mistake. That is what that shame monster is. That shame monster says you should have known better. Yeah. Shoulda, musta. Again, I call it shoulding on yourself and masturbation for those of you who are new to my live stream. If you go through your daily kind of thoughts, start recognizing shame if you can. That's the first step in helping getting rid of shame. So I have a comment. Comment is, I've learned that if we look at shame as a friend, if we thank it for protecting us, if we honor the protection it gave us in our experiences, it's no longer a monster. And then we can talk to it. So I love that idea. That is a really cool idea. My therapist brought up the idea of a meeting, and I took the meeting to be tea time. So I like to think of shame as coming to my tea time and sitting down with me. And when we have a conversation, we usually go to a good place. Because at the end of the conversation, I usually see that shame was trying to protect me or prevent harm in some way. And shame is a very extreme way of doing that. Whereas, as kind of two sides come to a table, generally the longer they talk, the more they kind of see places where there's overlapping rather than separation. So when I have that conversation with shame, just like Aubrey, you do, with honoring it and thanking it for protecting us, because that's what it was doing, it's not a monster anymore. So I love that you came up with that narrative. Kind of wish everyone had a narrative around shame. Like I said before, sometimes we can recognize shame by how it feels physically. Some people experience sweaty hands, shaky voice, tunnel vision, pins and needles, rapid heartbeat. So almost kind of feels like an anxiety attack, different from a panic attack. I want to be sure I separate those two. Panic attack, you feel like you're going to die. Anxiety attack is just strong anxiety all of a sudden. It's that adrenaline dump. That's an anxiety attack. So some people feel that. They feel an adrenaline dump. The interesting thing about when that happens, by the way, and this is another way we can be kind to ourselves, when we experience an adrenaline dump, which often happens when we feel intense amounts of shame all at once, we just might not recognize the shame in the first place. So when that happens, the chemicals that are released, the adrenaline that starts coursing through your veins, it actually goes up to your head. And there's a part of your brain right here called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for thoughtful decision making. This is the last part of our brain to form. It wraps up forming around the age of 26. However, bodies are bodies and they're not all the same. So anyway, so if you feel that adrenaline dump, the smart part of your brain literally turns off. This is not a you problem. This is a humanity's brains evolved this way, okay? The adrenaline dump is it triggers in our brain the response of, oh my God, I just saw a tiger and I'm going, it activates the fight or flight response. Fight, flight, or freeze. I'm going to run away, I'm going to fight it, or I freeze up, can't do anything. So that's another way we can be kind to ourselves, is as we recognize the adrenaline dump, then maybe later on we can say, oh, that's why I flipped a table, because the smart, responsible decision-making part of my brain turned off. And you can give yourself a little more slack, a little more appreciation, a lot less judgment, and just say, damn it. I recognized it 23 seconds instead of that 22 or whatever. But still, just noticing it makes a big difference. Gotta take credit for that. That's how you fight shame. You change the talk that goes on in your brain. That's why vulnerability is hard. Vulnerability, we're taught, can hurt us, and vulnerability can hurt us. And vulnerability also connects us. That's why we have those special friends, those people who know everything about us. It's because of vulnerability. You took an emotional risk, maybe when you were drunk or high or young or whatever the reason, or you wanted to connect, and you became that special friend. So, just want to check in, see if there are any questions. I want to have like a talking portion of my live videos where I talk for a little bit first, and then answer questions if there are questions from the night before, or comments or anything like that. Otherwise, I don't want to take up too much of people's evenings. I just want to be helpful and just bring awareness to something as big and scary and as mean as shame can be, and let everyone know that you're not alone. Shame always tells you that you're the only one feeling this way. That's one of shame's secret weapons. That's not true. So, if there are no other questions, then happy mental health to everyone. Feel free to leave a comment or a question or a suggestion as I move forward with this. I don't know if I should call it a vodcast, like a video podcast. I want to do this regularly. Grew up watching Frasier, and Frasier was one of my all-time favorite TV shows. And I love the idea of people calling in and other people, including myself, encouraging them, inspiring them, helping them, connecting them with others, or just connecting with them, using social media to build connections rather than feel more separate or, always comparing ourselves. So, thank you for watching. My name is Steven. Please leave comments and suggestions, and I look forward to seeing you again.